In today's Business Matters, the Trump Organization is suing Capital One for terminating hundreds of accounts. The organization and the president's son, Eric Trump, say the Virginia-based bank failed to provide any advance notice. According to the lawsuit, Capital One informed the Trump Organization in March 2021 that their accounts would be closed in June that same year. The plaintiffs say they believe Capital One was harboring, quote, unsubstantiated woke beliefs that it needed to distance itself from President Trump and his conservative political views. Those stances allegedly motivated the bank to abruptly close the organization's accounts. A Capital One spokesperson told the Epoch Times, quote, Capital One has not and does not close customer accounts for political reasons. Capital One has a market capitalization of around $66 billion. And it's the opposite of You're Fired for The Apprentice. The popular reality show has been hired onto Amazon's streaming service. The first season of the hit show is now available to watch on Prime Video. President Trump hosted all but one season. He left to kick off his first presidential campaign. The Apprentice is widely recognized as helping boost Trump into the national spotlight. In a statement, President Trump said he's looking forward to watching the show. He said, it was such a great memory and a learning experience for all of us. Amazon said it will exclusively stream the first 7 seasons, and season 2 and on will be rolled out weekly. Outages on X, the social media platform, went down multiple times today. Owner Elon Musk is blaming this on a massive cyber attack. Musk said the company is attacked every day, but this one was done with a lot of resources. He said he expects it will either be a large coordinated group and or a country involved. News outlets following Down Detector found thousands of outages reported this morning. Users submitted data showing earlier in the day there were as many as 40,000 impacted. And thieves have caught on to America's coffee craze, stealing truckloads as prices for beans increased to all-time highs. A sales coordinator for Hartley Transportation says there were dozens of thefts last year. He said in the past it would only happen rarely. Theft of coffee have also been reported in producing countries like Brazil and Vietnam. This is happening usually at farms where beans are temporarily stored after the harvest. Those sites are more vulnerable because they're isolated. The issue was discussed during the U.S. National Coffee Association's annual conference. Celine Dion is warning her fans to beware of fake AI-generated songs appearing online imitating her. She posted on Instagram about it over the weekend. The star wrote, quote, unsanctioned AI-generated music purporting to contain Celine Dion's musical performances, name and likeness is currently circulating online. The post went on to say the recordings are not fake, are fake rather, but not approved and not songs from Dion's official discography. Dion didn't name any particular recordings, but the use of AI is an increasing source of debate in the music industry. Last April, more than 200 artists, including Billie Eilish, Ja Rule, and Katy Perry, signed an open letter speaking out against AI-related threats in the music industry. And strapping smartphones to subways, that's a pilot program that MTA and Google tried and called out Track Inspect. Google Pixel smartphones were retrofitted to certain subway cars to collect sounds and other data that was sent to Google's cloud. The data was then analyzed for patterns that could signal track defects before they become a problem. The MTA says service disruptions are an ongoing problem, with more than 42,000 reported in December alone. Last year, this was a proof of concept partnership, but it's unclear how much it would cost for the MTA to implement. It already needs billions to complete existing projects. And China is posing new retaliatory tariffs on certain U.S. agricultural goods today. President Trump says his trade policies will make the U.S. richer in the end. Here's the latest on escalating trade tensions.
In trade, as in hockey, Canada will win.
Some American trade partners are cracking down on U.S. exports. Starting today, American farmers face new retaliatory tariffs on many products they send to China. The measures include an extra 15% duty on chicken, wheat, corn, and cotton, and a 10% one on items such as beef and soybeans. Some American farmers say they're worried escalating trade tensions could make it harder to sell their products abroad.
Everything we produce far exceeds what the domestic market could handle.
Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's newly elected successor is standing by Canada's retaliation against the U.S.
My government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
President Donald Trump is doubling down. He says some tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods scheduled for April 2nd, quote, could go up. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says duties on steel and aluminum imports are set to start Wednesday. Most mainstream economists say tariffs can be inflationary. Lutnick acknowledges some prices might rise in the U.S., but Trump says any pain would be short term.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America.
So the name may be Bond, James Bond, but the owner is now Amazon MGM Studios. Actor Pierce Brosnan, who famously played the British spy, says he laments the franchise takeover. For the past 3 decades, Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli oversaw the Bond films. The half-siblings will remain co-owners but have handed over creative control to Amazon. Brosnan, the GoldenEye star, said he hopes Amazon will treat the franchise with respect and dignity. He also hopes the American company doesn't pick an American as the next Bond. Instead, he hopes the next 007 will be British. Trump said his administration was in touch with 4 different groups about the sale of TikTok. Here's a closer look.
Donald Trump says a deal to sell TikTok could be close. Speaking to journalists on Air Force One on Sunday, he said there was a lot of interest.
Sir, do you think there's going to be a deal on TikTok soon?
There could be. We're dealing with 4 different groups, and a lot of people want it, and it's up to me. So there could be.
TikTok owner ByteDance had faced a January deadline to sell the app or shut down in the US. The previous US administration had viewed the Chinese app as a national security risk, as did Trump in his first term. But he has since revised his position and, on returning to office, signed an executive order delaying the ban by 75 days. Trump subsequently floated the idea of selling it to parties including Elon Musk, his ally in government cost-cutting efforts. He has also suggested that the US should get a stake in the app, which analysts value at up to $50 billion. Speaking last week, Trump said the 75-day deadline could be extended if more time is needed to do a deal.
I think, look, we have a lot of interest in TikTok, and China is going to play a role, and so hopefully China will approve of the deal, but they're going to play a role. But we have a lot of interest in TikTok.
On Monday, the identity of the 4 interested groups mentioned by Trump wasn't clear. Among those to recently express an interest is former Los Angeles Dodgers owner Frank McCourt. There was no immediate comment on Trump's claims from TikTok or ByteDance.
Spanish fashion retailer Mango is strutting its stuff overseas. The company reported a rise in sales last year to more than $3.6 billion. The retailer benefited from an international expansion with its focus on the U.S. Mango reported that nearly 80% of its total sales came from its international stores. The retailer has ongoing plans to expand shops in the U.S., which is one of its top 5 markets. Mango returned to the U.S. in May 2022 to open its flagship store in New York. This came after the company had made 2 previous attempts to break into the North American market. Deflation pressure is deepening in China. The economy continues to be weighed down by weak consumer spending, uncertain employment, and a prolonged property sector downturn. Now its consumer prices have plunged to their lowest in more than a year. The Consumer Price Index, a benchmark for measuring inflation, dipped 0.7% last month from the previous year. The drop is partially because the Lunar New Year holiday, which boosts spending, fell in January this year. The country's core CPI, which excludes volatile prices like food and fuel, also declined. The economy is also being squeezed internationally as the U.S. escalates a trade war on China, which has long relied on exports to drive growth. Americans again changed their clocks yesterday to observe daylight saving time. Earlier, I spoke to Jacob Berg, reporter for the Epoch Times, on the debate of making it permanent and the economic impact. Take a look. So what are the arguments in favor of keeping standard time year-round?
So one of the biggest reasons a lot of people support standard time, which is the time we experience between November and March before we change our clocks forward again, is mainly the late darkness in the early morning. If you extend daylight savings time into the winter, as they did in the early 70s, that we'll talk about in a second here, it leads to some areas in the country experiencing darkness well into 8:30 in the morning. And so a lot of people who do not want to see daylight savings time go year round will cite that as a reason. And then obviously the people on the other side of the fence will say, well, we don't want to have sunset at like 5, 6 p.m. certain days of the year. And so it's a lot of debate over, do we want darkness in the morning? Do we want it at night? And, going in back and forth between those two positions, essentially.
Can you talk to us about some specific businesses who differ in their views on daylight savings time?
Yeah, sure. So the golf industry is a really good example of businesses that support daylight savings time and have lobbied for it to be extended as they did in 2005, because it went from being October, it started in October, then went to November. Anyway, for golfers, it means more time on the course at night. It means being able to play into dusk in those hours. The candy industry lobbied for the extension of daylight savings time back prior to 2005 because they wanted an extra hour. They wanted the extra time to extend into Halloween so kids could have more time to go out and get candy. But the airline industry is an example of one that opposes and is against daylight savings time because, quite frankly, for them, it's difficult navigating time changes. Not nationwide, that's a little easier, but internationally, when you're going from one time zone to another, especially from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, when you change those times around, it makes the time differences from one destination to another pretty drastic. It leads to pilots having fatigue, and it's a big headache for the airlines. It's for sure.
Are there any economic impacts with the clock changes?
Yeah, so the original reason they decided to make daylight savings a thing in the early 1900s was during the two world wars. They wanted to conserve energy, and they saw it as a way to conserve burning fuel. You'd have more light in the evening and less need for electricity and things like that. And so when they changed it in the 70s, there was some reports that came out, and they determined that there is less energy consumption, but it impacts different people differently. Farmers, for instance, a lot of people assumed that we went to daylight savings time to help farmers, but actually back when we first started doing it, a lot of farmers would say, well, we just lost an hour of daylight in the morning for trying to get our goods to market, which was an immediate economic impact for a lot of farmers. So while, there's a lot of positives for it, less energy use, there's some industries that it just continues to be a headache for them. Mm-hmm.
All right, Jacob, thanks for your time. That's it for today.
Thank you.
CVS wants to grow itself by shrinking its floor plan. It's opening roughly a dozen stores this year that have only a pharmacy and are about half the size of the normal layout. They won't be including the part of the store that usually sells snacks, makeup, cards, and other things. The smaller stores are one part of CVS's plans for a turnaround, which have also included more than 1,000 store closures and thousands of layoffs. The chain is trying to adjust to a changing industry. Drugstore chains with large retail sections have struggled to keep up with companies like Amazon and Target. They've also had issues with theft, which has chipped away at profitability. Fewer people are buying homes. The National Association of Realtors says pending home sales dropped 4.6% in January. That's an all-time low. But experts say there are programs out there to make buying more affordable. Take a look.
The American dream of owning a home has become much more challenging. Experts say high prices and high interest rates have led to a housing affordability crisis.
That goal is seemingly so far away from many people.
Bankrate recently conducted a survey among aspiring homeowners and found 81% said a down payment and closing costs are an obstacle to owning a home.
These are tough times for people.
According to the most recent data from the National Association of Realtors, the median existing home sale price in January was $396,900. Many loan companies require a 20% down payment for a mortgage, which means a buyer would need to put down about $80,000 for a home that price. But there are other options for buyers.
There are programs out there where people can get a 10% down payment, even a 3% down payment.
One option is a Federal Housing Administration loan, known as an FHA loan. This government program helps low to moderate income families buy a home with as little as 3.5% down, depending on your credit score. The Department of Veterans Affairs also has programs to help veterans and their families buy a home. But Hamrick cautions that putting less down means higher monthly costs.
You're financing the rest of the purchase, so that means that your commitment for the financing is a bigger sum of money.
Hamrick also says potential homebuyers need to budget for monthly insurance costs, taxes, and home repairs.
Now, it looks like more and more people are worried about the national economy. According to the latest Consumer Expectations Survey from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, many Americans are losing confidence in the U.S. job market. They also said inflation is no longer easing and believe they will have greater economic problems a year from now. Researchers added the number of consumers who have said they have an increased chance of not being able to make minimum debt payments rose to levels not seen since April 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. The findings are based on responses from a rotating panel of 1,300 people. Car maker Ford plans to give billions of dollars to its struggling German operations as it tries to revive its European business. Here's more.
Ford will inject up to $4.76 billion into its struggling German operations. Monday's announcement comes as the US carmaker tries to revive its European business. Ford said recapitalizing its German operations will help support business transformation in Europe. It also believes the move will help it to compete with a fresh product portfolio. The auto giant further said it needs to simplify its governance, lower costs and drive efficiencies to build a sustainable business in Europe. The new funding commitment includes a capital injection to address overborrowing at its Ford Werke German arm and provides funding for a multi-year business plan. Ford also called on European policymakers to establish a clear agenda to promote electric vehicles, and it wants them to bring emissions targets in line with consumer demand. Europe's car industry has been forced into plant closures as competition from China has hurt demand. The sector is also bracing for US tariffs. Ford is cutting thousands of jobs in Europe, many of them in Germany, where domestic giant Volkswagen has also struggled and moved to close factories. Both companies have drawn worker protests in response.
The least visited U.S. national parks are often overlooked due to their remoteness, limited infrastructure, and challenging transportation options, but they offer remote and rugged beauty. Alaska alone is home to 5 of them, all featuring vast wilderness and wildlife. Isle Royale in Michigan is an isolated archipelago. Florida's Dry Tortugas has a historic fort. Washington's North Cascades has glaciers, while American Samoa features coral reefs, and Minnesota's Voyageurs is perfect for water exploration. And there are more, and despite fewer visitors, these parks offer unique, untamed beauty and adventure. A former Meta employee is releasing a book claiming to be an inside look at the workings of the company formerly known as Facebook. She shared an SEC filing with the Washington Post alleging that Facebook went to great lengths to win the approval of the Chinese Communist Party in order to gain a foothold in the Chinese market, claiming the company was willing to censor content, share user data, and more. NTD Sean Marshall has more details.
A former executive at Facebook's parent company Meta Platforms has accused the company and CEO Mark Zuckerberg of a major effort to grow Facebook's presence in China. She alleges that the company was willing to censor user content and offer the regime access to user data in an attempt to curry favor with the Chinese Communist Party. That's just a part of a 78-page whistleblower complaint by Sarah Wynne Williams, Meta's former global policy director for China. She filed the complaint with the SEC in April and shared it with the Washington Post. The Post reports that according to Wynne Williams, Facebook developed a China-specific censorship system in 2015 and proposed installing a chief editor to manage and potentially shut down the content during periods of social unrest. The Post reports that Wynne Williams also claims that Facebook was prepared to give the Chinese Communist Party oversight of all Facebook content in China and store user data locally, making it more accessible to surveillance by the Chinese regime. Meta is defending itself publicly. Andy Stone, communications director at Meta, says that the Washington Post failed to publish Meta's response in its entirety. It reads in full, "This is all pushed by an employee terminated 8 years ago for poor performance. We do not operate our services in China today. It is no secret we were once interested in doing so as part of Facebook's effort to connect the world. This was widely reported beginning a decade ago. We ultimately opted not to go through with the ideas we'd explored, which Mark Zuckerberg announced in 2019. Wynne Williams is releasing a book, Careless People, A Cautionary Tale of Power, Greed, and Lost Idealism, on Tuesday. The book's overview, published on the Barnes & Noble website, says the book gives you a front-row seat to Facebook and is an eye-opening memoir that reveals what really goes on among the global elite. The book alleges that the plan to develop a version of Facebook specifically for China was called Project Aldrin, after astronaut Buzz Aldrin, the first to land a manned spacecraft on the moon. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And U.S. stocks plunged today as relentless tariff wrangling and mounting anxieties from a possible federal government shutdown gave rise to fears that the U.S. economy could be careening into recession. The previous week's steep sell-off resumed, and this is gathering momentum as the session progressed, with all three major U.S. indexes suffering sharp declines. And the tech-loaded index also dipped more than 10% below its record closing high. And this is confirming that it entered a correction when it touched that high on December 19th. So the bellwether S&P 500 closed below its 200-day moving average. And this is a closely watched support level for the index. And it fell below that for the first time since November 2023. Okay, just a quick update on markets. And that's it for today on Business Matters.